Hello, everyone. My name is Carol Benton, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Geauga. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to our program today, Power of the Press, the Role of Local News in Preserving Democracy. When I was growing up in Central Ohio, this is quite a few years ago, my family had a steady stream of news coming through our front door and into our living room. Every afternoon, 2 daily newspapers landed on our doorstep, our hometown newspaper, the Delaware Gazette, and the Columbus Dispatch. Each week, we subscribed to 2 photojournalism staples, Look and Life magazine, if some of you remember those. After dinner, we gathered around the television to watch NBC's Huntley Brinkley Report. My dad was not a fan of Walter Cronkite. And before turning in for the night, my parents always caught the local 11 o'clock news. Needless to say, we stayed well informed, but we weren't unusual. This was simply the rhythm of American households across the country at the time. Today, there's an abundance of information in a multitude of formats from countless sources, yet it's hard to find commonality and consistency in the acceptance of facts and the understanding of events. This multitude of sources and formats has shifted democracy from a relatively centralized common information sphere, like when I was growing up, to a fragmented, contested landscape where facts themselves are now debated. That's what we will explore today with our panel, and we're thrilled and honored to present this important topic. I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists. First, Ken Douthit. Ken is the publisher, and wait for this list, publisher of the Chagrin Valley Times, the Solon Times, the Geauga Times Courier, the Good News, Westlife, the Vermilion Photo Journal, the Suburban Press, the Metro Press, and Currents. These publications serve over 50 communities in Northern Ohio, reaching over 70,000 readers per week and employing 125 people. Starting in the company's press room in 1969, Ken has served in every capacity within the company, a company founded in 1957 by his father in Sandusky, Ohio. Over the years, he also served as president of the Ohio News Media Association and the Ohio Newspaper Foundation. Abbey Marshall. Abbey is from Ideastream Public Media, WKSU, where she covers Cleveland area government and politics. She's a Cincinnati native and an Ohio University graduate. She moved to Northeast Ohio and worked for the Akron Beacon Journal as its city government reporter. She's won numerous awards for her work, including a regional Edward R. Murrow Award, and she was recently named Ohio's best audio reporter by the Press Club of Cleveland. Mark Naymik. Mark is the Signal Statewide Bureau Chief, Editor-at-Large. He has decades of experience in print, digital, and broadcast media. Prior to joining Signal, an online nonprofit newspaper, in 2022, Mark spent 19 years at the Cleveland Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com, where he covered politics and government and spent 6 years as the Metro columnist. More recently, Mark was an on-air reporter at WKYC Channel 3, which is a Signal Cleveland partner newsroom. And the moderator of our panel today is Dr. Gretchen Hoch from Kent State University School of Media and Journalism. Gretchen is a former television news reporter and anchor and has taught courses in reporting, broadcasting, and media ethics at Kent State since 2015. She also advises the student-run KSTV station. Her research agenda focuses on the psychological and emotional effects that covering traumatic news stories can have on journalists. She's been published in several top academic journals, including Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly and Journalism and Mass Communication Educator. She holds degrees from Ashland University, University of Akron, and Kent State University. Before we begin, I have a quick administrative note. Our panelists will take questions at the end of our discussion. On your table, there are pens and index cards. If you have a question, please use one of those cards, write your question legibly, and hold up your hand, and one of our question runners will pick that up. We will review the questions for clarity and relevance before we give them to Gretchen to pose to the panelists. So hopefully everyone sees all those. Please feel free to take the pens too. So with all that out of the way, thank you very much, panelists, for being here today, and I'm going to turn things over to Gretchen.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to moderate this discussion today. And I will ask, I did forget to ask before we started, I don't know how much time you want, as in making sure I keep us on time. How much time would you like for questions?
I think 15 minutes.
Okay, perfect. I realized that was probably an important question that I forgot to ask before we got started. Again, thank you very much for being here today, and it's really great to see such a large crowd interested in talking about local news and the challenges that they face and the importance of journalism in a democratic society. So I think we'll just jump right in and get started. Nothing like a sort of loaded question to start. I would love to kind of begin the discussion with just talking about what are some of the biggest challenges that local news outlets are facing today.
Financial sustainability.
What he says.
Absolutely. So,
But
oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
you know, I think the biggest problem, at least for us, is that with the advent of social media and the internet, there's a wealth of knowledge which leads to a poverty of attention, and there also is a parity of esteem with what's going on with social media. And both of those things really have an effect on us and what we do. I mean, there's just so much information, and then it's hard to differentiate between who's right, who's wrong, what's true, what's not true. And everything kind of has this equal basis. And so for people out there trying to figure out which way they're gonna go, it's difficult for us, and I'm sure it's even more difficult for you, so.
Just to elaborate on the one-sentence answer, and I'm never known for giving a one-sentence answer, but financial stability or sustainability obviously is the biggest challenge because it's so directly tied to the ability to report. Reporting is expensive. It's the weirdest business. We are the drain on the business. For perspective, when I started at the Cleveland Plain Dealer in the year 2000, which was a year the Plain Dealer was opening its printing plant at a time when the internet was coming online, roughly there were 350 reporters, editors that included news clerks at the time, people on the editorial. When I left 19 years later, maybe 65 people, and somewhere in there, less now. I don't know for sure because they've changed a lot since I've left, 3 years ago. But that is an example. And guess what? When you lose that many editorial staff members, you are not having dedicated teams that can spend 4 or 5 months on an investigative, accountability-driven story. You can't be in Lorain County. You can't be in Geauga County anymore. You can't be in anywhere. So you get the picture.
I was going to echo that and just say the resources of we cover 22 counties at Ideastream, but we are a smaller group of reporters. So while I'm dedicated to Cleveland and Cuyahoga County, we don't necessarily have, and we have reporters in Akron, we don't have reporters that are dedicated to each one of those counties. And that makes it really challenging because when you don't have people that are able, because you simply don't have the manpower, because you don't have the money, to be in those city halls and be talking to people, it kind of makes it more difficult, like you're chasing around as opposed to how it used to be, which is something that I've never experienced as someone that's only been professionally in the industry since college for about 5-6 years.
So knowing that things like financial stability and audience fragmentation are some of the biggest challenges facing local news outlets today, what can be done or what is being done to try to combat that and essentially stay alive, I guess?
What are you looking at me for? If I had the answer, I would be a rich man.
You still buy ink. You still buy ink.
I still buy ink, we just keep doing what we're doing and hope that people will finally wake up and see that there's value in what all of us do. I mean, I don't know, it's a tough question because I don't really have the answer of where we go from here. There's just so much out there, and And if you look at when I started 45 years ago, and how much has changed, especially within the last 5 years, who knows where it's going to be 5 years from now? I mean, it's hard to judge if you look at just what's progressed to. It's hard to imagine where we're going to be, and it just all we do at our papers is just keep doing what we've been doing for a long time. There's still value in it, and there's still people that depend on us to do it, and we're just going to keep doing it for as long as we can. But
I'll add, for better and at times for worse, we are changing how we report and deliver the stories, both in especially format. That's the most obvious. What digital has allowed is an awesome opportunity to provide more visual side of journalism, so let's tell stories largely through that. I mean, TV did one thing really well and still does, which is capture emotion, and when there is news breaking, I guarantee most of you still turn to the TV and or radio because you can be live instantly. But all publications, news organizations are taking advantage of the social media to provide that live. Yeah. I think good examples, if you paid attention to any of the recent demonstrations around the country and in Cleveland, the immersive ability to have a reporter with a phone in the middle of a demonstration or an event is awesome, right? You couldn't do that in the year 2000 when I was at the Plain Dealer. You would wait till the next day to get a story, and you hope that the plates at the printing plant were lined up so that the photo was somewhat clear and not have edges of multiple colors around them. So there are a lot of opportunities and great things that have come as a result, and we're trying to lean into that when we can to keep up.
Yeah, and it's not just about the distribution of news, it's changed kind of the collection, the way that we've collected it, and thinking really critically about how we're getting that news. You know, someone like me that's on a city government beat, of course, I'm still at City Hall, I'm still talking to local officials, very like old school, like, you know, shoe leather reporting is, I don't actually know where that term came from. But we also, like at Ideastream at least, we've been thinking a lot about how, whose stories we're telling and how we get to those stories. So yes, of course, we can collect those through social media. That's been a great opportunity. You know, I see something in the neighborhood groups, I see something on Facebook, I see something on Reddit that just really piques my interest or kind of gives me those ideas. But we also have an engaged journalism team. So there are people that don't necessarily have like a traditional beat like me, but they'll dedicate time to going into communities and having listening sessions, not necessarily with the intent of coming out with deliverables, but just making those connections with people, getting a sense of what the problems are, what the challenges are facing the community, what great things are happening in the community, and it kind of does help with what I was talking about earlier, where we don't have reporters that can be here all the time, but if we have a team that can come in and have these regular listening sessions with people, there's always great reporting that can come out of that. Solutions journalism has been something that's been really popular in recent years, which is looking at problems and looking at what solutions people have to solve those problems. So I think just thinking about different ways that we can collect the news in addition to the distribution of it has been really important, because we've had to adapt to what people want and what people are telling us, and reaching those more difficult to reach communities, because rural and low-income communities are the first to kind of see that news desert as the financial crisis continues.
Mm-hmm. So considering the challenges that news outlets and local news outlets face, coupled with sort of the for lack of a better way to put it, the general attack on the institution of journalism that has grown over the past several years, and also coupled with the fact that we know that journalism is in the Constitution for the specific purpose of being able to foster dialogue and feed the democratic process. What responsibilities do you think local news outlets, despite all the challenges, have in trying to continue that democratic process and contribute to it and to the best of their ability make sure that it stays intact?
I'll start maybe because we have we're a little different at the nonprofit newsroom. There is a side of us that feels traditional. We have beat reporters that cover government, but we also have a side that focuses very much on community and democracy building. It's called our Documenters program. That's where we train and pay folks of all stripes to go to public meetings, to try to preserve that idea that there is purpose to a public meeting, to someone being there. They take notes. We clean them up. They're not reporters. We don't portray them that way. And we publish those notes. There are still shockingly numbers of public meetings that are not televised or recorded, which you would think in this day and age should be. So that is an example of one thing we do to try to preserve the democratic process, which is engaging the public, giving them an opportunity, and then making sure that there's a full cycle, that that information travels from the government back to the public.
Go ahead.
All right. I just think about like public records and things like that, things that these laws that exist that journalists use all the time. But part of that for me, I tell my friends all the time, hey, you don't have to be a reporter to file a public records request. You want the emails of your city council person talking about XYZ, you can ask for that as a member of the public. So I think, it is really great that reporters, we're paid, so we have the time and energy. I can call over and be like, hey, it's me again, checking up on that. But really making sure that people are aware that they have this opportunity too, especially with everyone having access to technology, everyone having access to those resources. Kind of what Mark's saying, I think that that's really great, is putting that back in the hands of the public as well.
I was just going to add that a little story that I had a reporter who attended city council meetings every other week for many, many years. And she told me that most of the time she would be the only one there. And her comment was, can you imagine what they would do if I wasn't here? Mm-hmm. And I think that's pretty much our mission, is to continue to attend the meetings and keep our eyes on public officials and what they're doing, and just put it out there for you all to pick up and read when you get a chance. I mean, that's what I was trained to do, and that's what we do.
And particularly important in the cities and communities you cover, because that is where you find elected officials that have been there for 10, 20, and even 30 years in charge. And the longer you're in charge, the easier it is for everything to just feel normal and natural and actually not be questioned. I mean, again, you look at Brecksville, Mayor Ruby was there for decades. We saw it in Beechwood with Merrill Gordon. I did a series of stories about him that were, to me, what was going on was stunning, but the voters elected him, and then it took one more cycle before they knocked him out. But it was that example of just like, look, I'm in charge. No one's really questioning it. What's the problem? The city's great. I do remember at one point the mayor asking why I'm not focused on places like East Cleveland and others that have real problems. You have to chase the ones that were indisputably doing a good job, but that is unchecked power. Anyway, you can find those online, because that was still mind-blowing.
I'm reminded of I was at a reception once, and the mayor of one of my communities came up to me, and he said, I have to thank you. I was taken back a little. He said, your reporting keeps us honest.
Keeping with that thread of holding people in power accountable, has the political climate made that more difficult, or made it more important, perhaps? How has the political climate kind of influenced that very important job of the media?
I'll start with a story that I think will illustrate some of it. So politicians don't need the media. We know that. They communicate directly with supporters and would-be supporters. I was covering John Kasich's first run for Ohio governor. I can't remember the exact year, 06-ish, but I do remember the defining moment for me when he was going to make his announcement. Maybe it was for re-election, and they skipped the media and went straight to YouTube. And that was like that moment. So that's like, what is it, 10 plus years ago where that started. That was the first time like I noticed that very obvious. Now today that's completely normal and everything. There's things happening all the time that never come to the media. So the question, the challenge then is, you have to change how you report because you're not going to rely on sort of an honest broker to tell you things or give you an opportunity to question and cover because they can control the coverage completely.
I'm thinking of, for example, President Trump tweeting, or well, I guess it's not tweeting anymore, but whatever you do on X and Truth Social and, whatever it's called now. That idea that a politician can sort of put that message out there unchecked, when they could never have done that prior to, it used to have to come through a news conference or some sort of controlled environment where they could be questioned. How do you think that has also contributed to the ability of the press to again, hold people accountable or check the misinformation or less than truthful statements that are made?
Now there's your loaded question.
Yeah.
You want to repeat that?
I guess for simplicity's sake, has a politician's ability to just sort of put out on social media whatever they want unchecked, has that made it harder to hold them accountable? Has that made it harder to
Not on our level.
Mm-hmm.
I recent 2 years ago, I think, Aurora and Twinsburg, Gannett closed their newspapers. And both mayors called me immediately and wanted me to come down because they wanted a newspaper in their towns. And I had a long meeting with them and they were very anxious, but unfortunately I couldn't do anything. Revenue challenged, employee challenged. But in doing my due diligence, I went and I looked, and they're all they have great city websites, and they're all over social media. And it's like, what do you need me for? You've got great websites. You're on social media. You're doing, and both of them had the same answer. Nobody reads it. And I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what they told me. And on my level at the local community, we haven't had that many. We have a few politicians that kind of ignore us and do their own thing, but most of them are pretty responsive to what we have to do at my level. It might be different for the two of you because you're at a higher level and life is different. But
Not higher, different.
Different
It is a different level.
Yeah.
Look, the good news is the media has adapted to that. They all now treat, certain social media feeds as press releases. They are very smart and well-trained reporters. Love or hate, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, the majors, they have the people there that know how to interpret, know what it means, and are able to report from that. They're not being fooled, they're not even, politicians aren't even jumping the gun anymore because just as they can say things in real time, reporting is happening in real time.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's what I've always really liked about covering local government is that it's very tactile in a way that federally and even sometimes state doesn't feel for people. It's really accessible to call your council people. A lot of them will answer it. They're the people you call about everything, yell at, get mad at, regardless of if it's something they can control or not. And as a reporter too, these are the people, like I live in the city of Cleveland, which is the city that I cover. There's in some ways no hiding. They're the people that you see at the grocery store, the neighborhood bar, things like that. So it's like you really see these people and you interact with them in a way that's not just, hey, I'm gonna send you an email and I'm sending it into a void, So that's what I've always really liked about reporting locally is that you really feel like you're a part of the community. And a lot of the council people, more or less, they're there because that's what they want, to serve, their neighbors, or that's at least the idea. So that's, I haven't quite experienced anything like that.
So if people see that sort of more national level antagonistic relationship between, for example, President Trump or some of the others and those national media outlets, that's not necessarily reflective of what happens at the local level.
No.
I mean, I can't speak to that. Again, reporting in Cleveland, all of our elected officials are Democrats, and so I think in some ways it's almost swung the other direction because, for example, the mayor is really going in on saying, this is what I don't agree with President Trump, and often I see a lot of elected officials condemning a lot of things that are happening on the federal level. So I think some of that show too of, hey, we're not like that, has kind of made, I don't want to say transparency necessarily, but maybe that responsiveness to show that that's not the way that they're presenting themselves.
Maybe to try to put some of the local mayors in the Trump camp, I would say, not politically, but Cleveland Mayor Justin Bibb is very active on social media and does do some of that direct announcements, explanations about events, whether it's new housing.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing that on social media, and sometimes first or at least at the same time there might be a release out. So there is a system to be gamed, politically. In that regard, but also they use it, as Abby's pointing out, to push back on some of the larger messaging. I mean, quite frankly, I think the Mayor Bibb has seemed very eager for a battle with Trump over National Guard coming to Cleveland because it's going to instantly, he can ride that platform, take that issue and be there in the mix. So it works, for and against, but they're all taking advantage of it.
Right.
I was just making sure you didn't have anything to add. So we've mentioned social media a couple of times, whether the politicians are using that to sort of directly reach their constituents and kind of go around the media, or in a way how it's starting to impact how people get their news and where their attention is. How does that, something like social media, because it really has change the audience, change their attention, and change the way people can communicate with the audience. Has that impacted, or in your opinion, do you think it has impacted or has implications for an informed citizenry and the democratic process? Is it positively contributing, or is it negatively contributing, or is it kind of both?
I mean, I think it's both. Everyone can be a citizen journalist now because everyone has a phone, everyone has a camera. They can record something, put it up. But without, we all follow like a code of ethics when you become a journalist. And if I'm not even saying maliciously doing it, but if you aren't aware of certain things, it can really, that missing context can really be harmful. Even just sometimes getting on social media as a journalist and seeing a video of something that's happening, if there's context missing, we're not seeing the full story. So in some ways it's great because, like I alluded to earlier, I get great story ideas. I talk to people I might never talk to, but you also have to be careful because there is that echo chamber, and a certain group is on the internet talking about this and riled up about this, but there's another group, especially like in Cleveland, there is a lack of broadband access in certain communities, so you're missing an entire group of people. So yeah, I think that there's challenges in both ways, especially with AI and all of the stuff that's happening on Facebook. There is a way for misinformation to spread really quickly. We just have to make sure we're adapting to that and kind of embracing it and making sure that we're part of the conversation as well. And we have journalists and I'm not going to say particularly young people, but maybe young people that are digital natives that know how to kind of play that game a little bit.
That's really well said. So everything she said there, I don't want to try to step on in any way because I think maybe I'll just add an example. There is an outrage machine in social media, like literally people who are operatives for respective parties that try to seize a viral moment, a video, a picture, of someone saying something stupid, one side or the other, and then you exploit it to make it seem like that represents the entire movement. I think maybe recently we saw a lot of that out of the, very brutal fight captured in Cincinnati. And this one had all the elements of a good outrage because it was racial, black people beating up a white man, and so much came out of that. It became on the vice president's radar. It was seen, there was a larger story there. There was then a town hall meeting convened by Vivek Ramaswamy, who's running for Republican governor. Signal covered it. What was interesting about that, while he was trying to take advantage of that moment, he did ultimately allow it to be organic and let people discuss race, with people getting up and saying, well, are we only outraged because of the race of the people? There is violence going on all the time that no one seems to care about, but in this case, and there was more to the story, doesn't justify anything that happened, but that danger of the outrage machine is what is disconcerting. I just will tell you what I tell my kids all the time, which is, because they are on social media, right? They've been unimpressed that I've been on TV. They've never read a newspaper. But they do rely on social media for feeds, so I'm always just saying make sure you're getting a lot, and always start with the basis that most of what you're seeing is out of context.
Anyone can say anything, for better or for worse, and then I think that that's the danger, really, is that once it's out there, it's out there. Even if you fact check it in the next sentence, anyone can say anything. I think about that moment during the presidential debate where, Trump famously said people were eating the dogs and cats, and it's because people can just get on TikTok or Twitter or whatever and say, oh, my neighbor's eating my dog. It's totally unchecked, and it's out there now because it's on a huge platform, and so it doesn't really matter sometimes to a lot of people if people in that community, journalists in that community, are saying, well, here's the reality of the situation. It's already out there, and I think that's the big danger.
Personal anecdote, Mark, you saying your kids didn't care if you were ever on television. I have my son who's he's very smart, but he's just not really great on the language arts side of things, not a really great writer, and I've repeatedly told him that I can help him, that this is like this and like Spanish are probably the only two ways. Don't come at me for math, but language arts and Spanish, I have your back. And he said to me the one day, well, you teach journalism, why would you know writing? And I was I'm like, there's so much wrong with that. So I feel you on there's nothing. I'm like, yeah, you're right. Thanks, buddy. So I think I've missed, that's indication I've missed a beat there maybe. So you, Abby, you had mentioned something about professional standards and journalists, and so then you have got this social media sort of really allow, or phones really, and then social media just adds to it, has allowed for the citizen journalists, and anybody can sort of shoot the video and put it out there, but not with any standards or guidance on what may be the ethical sides of it. Do you think that things like social media, this idea of anybody could kind of put information out there, influencers, all of that, has that kind of harmed the reputation of journalism, or helped people not realize that journalists actually are trained and that there are guidelines and things that we do and do not do, as a journalist versus just a regular person with a phone?
I think so, especially I think in my generation a little bit, because it's just a totally different landscape. We grew up with the internet. So again, if that standard is that anyone can say anything, I think that they sometimes apply that to the press as well. They think, we can just go on and say things that are maybe unverified or what we believe without that code of standards. I talk to even my friends sometimes and explain, certain ethical things we can and can't do, and they don't realize that that's necessarily the case. So I think that is kind of damaging to our credibility sometimes, is that they just conflate the two.
I don't think anybody understands how much we have to go through when we do a story. The reporter has to make all the calls and do all the legwork and go to the meetings and call people and wait for them to call you back. And you got to remember that half the time they're not going to sit there and say, oh yeah, I really screwed that up. That's not going to happen. But then they write that story, then it goes to an editor. And the editor goes through it, makes sure, and reads through it, makes sure that it's factually correct, and and she has questions, it goes back to the reporter. And then it goes back to the editor. And then in our place, when we were doing the final thing, most of the time, we'll have the reporters proofing not only their stories, but they proof the other stories. So it's all getting proofed, and it's a long, hard process, and you're right, we do have standards that and I don't think anybody understands that. I think they think, and off it goes, and that's not the way it is. It's a long, complicated process to do a story. And in my medium, your medium, it doesn't matter, you know. So I think that does hurt us, that people don't really understand how much work is involved in actually putting out paper, something online, doing a radio, you know, it's just a lot more complicated than anybody thinks.
Well, I appreciate that you took us back to still a point that hasn't changed within all of the changing media, which is there are still some basic things any reporter, at least in these organizations, are still doing, right, is, you know, first of all, providing opportunity for comment or response, or the need to make sure we hear from the organization first. Now, that is narrowed a bit because there is a gamesmanship that goes on a lot with the media. I can not respond and therefore keep you from publishing, and there's always a point at which you make the decision. But the nice side is with digital is that if you then, and this happens all the time, only after the story comes out do they decide now they have something to say. But we will update the story, but always note that their response followed the publication. I think there's some nuance there. But those basic standards, probably the biggest challenge, and I'm sure we're dealing with is, in competing with like the blogger or the online influencer, is true sourcing. We all hear the same whispers, and we are competing. There's a blogger in particular in the State House that will just go with it, because we probably all know it's true, but we still would have the need to make sure we're hearing it. And it doesn't mean that we hear it from 3 different people, because they could all be feeding off of the same source. You've got to make sure you are hearing it from people with some direct relationship. So that is all the things that still at least get balanced. And you know, on your point of all that goes into it is underappreciated, though it's still, you know, it's not something we should talk about or complain about, because that's just that we have to do that. Whether people understand how the sausage is made or not, we still have to get it right when it comes out.
I was just going to say, yeah, and explaining that to sources up front, especially those that haven't interacted with the media as much. You know, of course, politicians that always deal with the media, they, like Mark said, know how to kind of gamify it. But especially when you're in certain communities that maybe don't have reporters coming in all the time, kind of explaining up front, like, hey, thank you for sharing your story. Like, here's how we have to do it. I have to verify the claim. I will have to go to this other side. You know, I think about a story I'm working on with a colleague right now where we have some people complaining about a certain institution, and you have to explain, thank you so much for like your vulnerability and reaching out and sharing that, but we will have to, you know, take these claims to them. We can't publish unverified claims, and really explaining that process so they also feel like they're a part of it and they don't feel like, you know, well, I said all this and why isn't it in the story? Really just making sure that people are aware of the process, and I think that builds a level of credibility and trust with the people that you serve too.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an interesting part of teaching journalism students, is because they will default to the idea that, well, this person told me that, so it must be true. And, you know, so then we have to, you know, we do a lot of like, okay, well, you're going to have to go to the other side. You're going to have to go to the university. If students complain that this happened, you can't just put that out there. We have to go to the university and give them a chance to respond and verify whether or not these things are happening. So I think it's that, there's that just sort of like common thread of people not realizing that just because I said it doesn't make it true. And it's, as a journalist, you do have to verify what people say, and you can't just go with it. Even if it's, you know, for example, a victim of a crime or a victim of something, there is some verification there. We can't just go with what they say. Is there a way that, and the answer may be no, but the idea that people don't really understand how the sausage is made, is there a way that local news could maybe contribute to a better understanding of what journalists do have to do? And would that help, I guess, in the public's understanding of the standards?
Well, I think what Abbey described is very much it, which is making sure we're not extractive. We just drop in and take something from somebody and not explain to them the process, which I know public radio does very carefully. We try to do the same. So you're educating on a one-by-one basis. I think a larger way to explain it is, of course, the transparency. In most media, all of us here do it when there are mistakes, corrections, updates made to a story. Yes, there is a difference between a clarification and a correction, but all that process is there. I know on our site and many other sites, we have all of our policies listed, what the process is, our code of ethics, some version of that's always up there. So people that want to learn a little bit more about that process, it is there. We want to keep it out there for it. So those are one ways. Through our program of training and paying people to cover public meetings, we're explaining in that process how that works, and that is part of that civic side hustle that we're trying to support through our organization. Those are just some ways.
Nothing to add.
So in terms of kind of, again, sort of circling back to some little topics that have come up, misinformation is another thing that's out there and is not necessarily journalism's fault that it's there, but journalism and journalists have taken on the burden of having to try to debunk it, try to put try to show people where the truth lies and where it doesn't. Obviously, there's a lot of talk of things like misinformation on that more national level. From a local standpoint, is misinformation and trying to debunk that sort of thing, is that something that is occurring a lot at the local level?
We're filtering. I'll give you an example. I mean, when ICE raids started to happen across the country, there were lots of rumors and calls about ICE is here or there, and they're arresting people. We got, it's hard to kind of sort through that, but we are making that effort. That is misinformation or, again, just rumors, and that is the same for, events in any community that are happening. You hear it, people have all kinds of, particularly around crime, exaggerated descriptions of what happened, number of people injured, like all of those things are things that have to be weighed to combat the misinformation. And then, of course, politically, the misinformation is probably the biggest challenge because, we are dealing with it right now on President Trump's big, beautiful bill, right? Did it cut Medicaid or not? You can find people saying things completely opposite. Does it hurt rural hospitals or not? When speaking recently with, our reporter was with John Husted, the state senator, he said, that's wrong. We added $50 million to prop up the hospitals. I think what's probably missing in that statement is that actually is true. They've put that in there, but that is a reaction to the impact of that very bill, that the changes in how hospitals have somewhat gamed the Medicaid system, they've been able to get higher Medicaid reimbursements. So that's changing, so that's dropping, but then we're adding here. So that is examples of like where it gets a little more complicated and harder to sift through.
And I think that we have to balance to what we give air to. So for example, if the mayor says something, the mayor of Cleveland, let's say he says something egregiously incorrect during his State of the City speech, well, that's something that we're gonna fact check in real life. But if we're seeing rumors buzzing around social media that might not necessarily come from like official sources, it's always a balance of, do we give air to that to debunk it, or is regurgitating what maybe people are saying that's not true going to be more harmful? So it really does depend on that context.
Mm-hmm.
Great point, but that's
Yeah.
it right there, because
Yeah.
debunking something gives it actually the very oxygen, and we come across that a lot, and particularly in political coverage, which is like, we're gonna.
Yeah, so you actually risk bringing attention to the misinformation in the effort to debunk it, right, and correct it. And so maybe people may not have seen it if it's, so it's that sort of debate of trying to decide whether to leave it be or to put it out there and try to debunk it for sure. Do you think, and Mark, you mentioned things like the big beautiful bill, obviously kind of localizing things that happen at the federal level and what that might look like for folks within your viewership and your readership or listenership, I guess. Do things like misinformation and the political climate make that harder? When you are trying to take something like the big beautiful bill and say, all right, here are the provisions that are in it, and this is what parts of it might affect Northeast Ohioans. Has that become more difficult?
We've all done it up here. In probably a even more relevant example would be just with our state budget. I think everybody was writing about the impact on schools, property tax changes, and I thought the media as a whole did an outstanding job of trying to sift through some of it, particularly because still a lot of changes get thrown in late at night. The final versions of those are not getting passed until 2 o'clock, and I think this year was closer to 1 o'clock. And what's happening are amendments, which in the state of Ohio, we are not required to reveal who submits these amendments. I still think that's nuts. But I think we've seen stories across the board of what is the potential Medicaid changes, what does this mean for schools? Are schools getting more money or less money? A lot of that depends on the district and their formulas and the changes to whether or not a school district could take extra money and hold on to it. Then there were provisions being put in to say, well, if they have a certain percentage of extra money, they have to give it back to taxpayers. That's one of the things that Governor DeWine vetoed, because you might have a surplus this year and then the following year you're desperate for money. Those are examples of, I think, the media doing their job, at least giving air to it. And the fact that I'm even, it's really hard to edit those two, because then I have to become the expert and make sure I'm getting it right. And I may have not got all the nuances there, but you get my point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the difficult part, is the time when you have to spend becoming an expert very quickly on something that you might not be an expert on. There's been times where an editor has asked me a question of like, hey, I wonder how this thing is impacting people in our communities, and I try to dig into it, but because there's just so much misinformation or things that I don't have simply the time to understand, I've had to say, I actually don't have time for that, which might sound lazy or neglectful, but it's really not, because I have to, some things have to get done. I have to go to city council. I have to be in those meetings for the reasons that we've talked about. There are just like certain daily things that need to happen. So I think that going back to kind of our beginning conversation about having those financial resources kind of strained when you don't have people that have the time to just do investigative reporting. We kind of have to wear all the different hats. I have to be a daily beat reporter. I have to be investigative. We have to edit sometimes. You have to take pictures, video, everything, which is what they told me my freshman year in journalism school. Like, hey, everyone's a multimedia reporter now. Be prepared to do everything. And I think that's a big difference from where the industry was at 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Has that, sort of sticking with that thread, has that demand to do more with less and become that multimedia journalist, has that affected local news's ability to cover the news? Does it make it harder? Does it make it, are there those stories that fall through the cracks because you have to do too much and there's no time?
I'll speak for me, because I know there are editors in town that would argue they're putting out the best stuff they ever have, and I would say we're not. If we go back to that example of, size matters, it needs to be managed well, but when we have the ability to have teams to focus on very specific topics, you could do the dive. Are reporters more efficient, and there was probably things that could have been gained 20 years ago from that? Sure. Yeah, we are more efficient. Part of that is all the things that digital provides. We can make changes quick. We got spell check. You got all these things that can happen. But I do think journalism, what the reader sees isn't as good as it could have been if they had, some of the resources to have extra people digging in. That's, again, just speaking for me as a 30-year journalist.
It's the same on our level. I mean, the Cheyenne Valley Times, Solon Times, I used to have 10, 12 reporters. On the small little weekly, I'm down to 4. And I just don't have, they don't have the time. There's enough, subjects are complicated, and there's a lot of meetings, and they just don't, it's hard to do with 4 when you had 12 before. So it hinders us.
I will give like a little glimmer of hope from what I've seen is that, while newsrooms might have fewer reporters than they had before, I would say that there's like a good diversity of what media is now. Even up here, we have public radio, we have a nonprofit newsroom, we have print newspaper. We're all kind of serving different purposes, even if sometimes, I'm competing with, another media outlet for certain city hall stories. We serve different audiences and we offer different things, and that competition does drive better reporting. So that has been something, with the rise of the internet and having more niche publications or just a variety of publications, I think that that's really a good thing.
Mm-hmm. How do you decide then, from a news management standpoint, knowing, for example, you have 4 reporters when, once upon a time you had 12, how do you prioritize what gets covered and sort of deciding what is the most important thing, things for your audience to be able to know?
Well, for us, it's just which stories are going to affect the most people and kind of work our way down.
I love this question because it cues up something that's always makes me angry. And, we all can complain about lacking size or not having what we used to. But I really believe that, like, you must judge each of us, every news organization, not by how many reporters they have, but how they deploy the resources that they do have. We are never going to spend time covering an opening of a Chipotle. We are not going to write about what the cost of Taylor Swift tickets are in Argentina. That is a real example. I get why organizations do it. It's grabbing audience that all is part of their need to grow and their build. But you got to judge us based on how we deploy the resources that we do have.
From a resources standpoint, we've touched on the financial challenges and not being able to have as many reporters, and knowing the importance of local news within a community and with the idea of things like news deserts and how bad that can be from a standpoint of not being able to hold people accountable, to inform folks in certain areas. Does the public have a responsibility, or what role could everyday citizens play in supporting local news?
Buy a subscription, donate.
Right, exactly. Yes, we always start there. But I think, sometimes readers have an unrealistic expectation, or, well, how come you didn't tell me that, or I didn't know that? And we do provide as many links and work. Sometimes you do gotta invest and make it a two-way a little bit. But the fact that you're all sitting here means you've already passed that test, right? I mean, because you are engaged and you're here to hear about it. There's still a lot of criticism of media that I never want to dismiss, because I want to learn from the criticism, but a lot of it is just blustered or uninformed. Often it's like, well, how come you guys never write about anything good? I used to get that all the time at the Plain Dealer and at, even TV, and I'm thinking, what are you reading? There is an arts section, a business section. Well, what are those covering? It's like good news, opening, ribbon cuttings, stuff like, if you're focused on the Metro or the crime section, sure, it might seem like that. In television, the way a newscast is built, you're going to throw some of the more serious and maybe downer news right in the first 3 or 4 minutes, but in that first block of 8 minutes of news, you're going to get towards the end of that, and you're going to be like, oh, now we're on happy stuff and dogs and pets and so sometimes I push back and say, yeah, work with us a little bit here. It's not that bad.
And what I always say to those people that complain about it is, well, give me a story idea, you know? And I would say a lot of times they don't respond. They just want someone to yell at sometimes, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Another challenge, and actually one of my questions might be, has it become a challenge yet at the local level? We talked about things like social media from a technology standpoint, but AI, is that a thing at the local level? I mean, there's so much discussion about how AI is affecting or changing or impacting something. Is that affecting local news, or will it eventually? Is it something that's here or on the horizon from a local news standpoint?
Go
I
ahead.
believe the Plain Dealer's already using it.
Yeah,
Am
it
I
is.
wrong?
Go ahead. Yeah, I mean,
Well,
there's-
I
yeah,
was
we'll
gonna
talk
say-
about this.
Yeah.
We can
In-
spend a
in-
minute or two. There's
Sure.
a lot here on this.
Yeah,
topic.
there's
Yeah.
a lot. I think it will really impact, and we're already seeing it happen. I think Gannett has used it as well. I sometimes will just troll the reporter, like local reporting job listings, and I see a lot of AI-assisted reporters. Now, what they're actually doing, I don't know. Internally, we have a policy that we don't use AI. Certain transcription services might use it when you're taking notes or something like that, but we don't use it. We're not allowed to use it for any kind of content generation, even just like fixing audio that we might use for a newscast. So we aren't using it, but I do think it's one of those things where it's kind of like the internet. When I imagine how I feel right now, like this panic and outrage is probably how people felt when the internet was first coming up. But again, that's something that I've always lived with and always experienced and had to navigate for better or worse. So I think it would be like a bad thing if we just ignored it entirely, because I do think that there are tools. The Knight Foundation has some tools where they've talked about here's how AI can bolster reporting in some cases, and you talk about like looking at spreadsheets and a lot of data reporting. So if it can get to a point where it is reliable for things like that, that could be used as tools to assist, that's great, but I don't know that that's where we're at yet. I fear about content generation. That's where my concern is a little bit.
Okay, there's a whole range of AI that is embedded in most news organizations.
Right.
And I think it is to be embraced and feared. Let's talk about where it can be embraced first. I think we first saw it when I think we saw news organizations using AI to give us the kind of what was always the agate type of all the high school sports scores from around your region. Could care less. Perfect use of it, right? That stuff gets entered in. No, I mean, it gets uploaded. You know, athletic directors send in the scores or whatever, and if somebody wants to make sure there's a post that tells you that, personally, sure, because there isn't a lot that needed to go into filtering and checking, right? That an AI is good enough that if I put in a score 27-7, it's going to get that right. That's one example. We've all used AI, you all use it, that's called spell check. It was probably the beginning. Now you have generative sentencing, which is annoying as heck on Google, all that, just turn it off. All right, so there's a level there. Abby mentioned correctly, like, there are many, many journalistic tools being used now, and we use some that are just literally, right? We've all had a recording transcribed on Otter. I mean, that's all AI. And there are issues there from the fact that most people don't know on the paid version of Otter, they are allowed to do what they want with that information. If you did an interview with a victim of a sex crime and you are discussing and calling her Anne, Otter has it, and they could potentially reveal that name. So lots of things to learn on it, but I don't know any reporter that, particularly in broadcast, that sometimes doesn't need a quicker transcription. It is used to take massive reports and just say, can you highlight some stuff? And we have a partnership with Open Campus, which is a nonprofit. They fund education reporting, and they have some tools for the reporters. Take a Cleveland State report by Ernst & Young, and you can, basically, it's like essentially Googling a doc or doing a word find, but you're asking it to pull out anything that said anything about the wrestling program getting cut. That's a real example, right? It can do it, maybe faster than you can read 80 pages.
Right.
Don't have a problem with it. Does not generate any content. It is actually just giving me some information to then go with. So there are variations throughout on AI. Now we can go to the other extreme that is also present. Think Cleveland.com, which writes a lot about their own use of it, so their editor discusses why and when. They use it to generate stories off of their own podcast. So they can do multiple stories that'll just quote their own podcasters and make it feel like a real story. It'll have a headline that's kind of provocative. And I'm like, ooh, who said that? Well, it turned out it was just their podcaster. But they're generating multiple stories. And the idea is really to generate and engage the reader. They can get more clicks. It's all part of their economic model. That's fine. That's theirs. They do openly say that. The bottom of their stories, they will tell you which ones were AI generated. We do not generate any stories using AI. Again, along the lines of spell check, I think eventually more will do copy editing. I love that we at Signal have a copy editor, a human. That's great, but there may be times where those days are gone because AI is, it can be programmed to kind of give you the style guide that you want. Those are just some examples of the range. And then there are fully AI, like publications, and we've been seeing a lot of great stories. I don't know if you saw the Spotify story about the band that broke the top 10 and the entire thing was fake. Like it was part of this experiment to see, not only the pictures, the images, the band was, trending, but it was all just created through AI. So again, feared and embraced. We're all gonna have to figure it out. It's like the early days of the internet.
I think
We tried it once. The one good thing was that it kind of got us off the hump and got us going on an editorial. But we ended up having pretty much to rewrite the whole thing. So right now, I'm sure AI will be part of our future, but for us, it's in the back room. So.
Yeah, I think it could be a solution, kind of what we were talking about, to a lot of the time complaints that we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
There are just like a lot of really small logistical things you have to do. I even think about in our, like a content management system, like putting in all the tag, like I always joke, if I don't have to sit in a 10-hour long city council meeting like in the summer and I can just get the highlights, that'll actually free me up to do a deeper, more investigative piece or be in a community that I'm not normally in. So it might be someday a solution to kind of some of the problems that we're talking about, but.
Yeah, worth pointing out, so every website, or in our case, it's WordPress, they have options, of course, that we could pay for if we want it, and we're not, that would just automatically do the search engine optimization. That's basically the fancy keywords that'll get you seen on Google. Mm-hmm. AI can do it, it can do it pretty well. So those options continue to grow. And there was another point, I think, because there's so many rushing to the little funnel of my brain, I can't get them all out. If I come back to it, I'll jump in.
Ultimately, it's the summary is it's complicated. There's a lot associated with something like AI. Do you think, especially from that content generation standpoint, is there is that one more thing that could be a challenge to journalistic credibility? If there are things that are being created and not labeled as AI generated, is that just one more thing that journalists may have to sort of like fight off in terms of their credibility?
Yeah.
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 Yes, and I remembered the other point in it. There is another danger of AI, and it's been now starting to get well covered. I think generally, if I can get some of the keywords, there's a Wall Street Journal headline that said AI is crushing the major news websites because they're no longer getting the referral traffic.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you used to Google something, and you would get a bunch of stories to pick from and you could click on it, and it would take you to that website. AI is now skipping that whole thing and just giving you the answer, which means traffic at websites is dropping. We've seen it. We don't know how much is really attributed to the AI search, but most traffic to a website, it took me a long time to truly accept this fact, doesn't come from the homepage. Doesn't matter really what your homepage looks like. It's all done through search.
Right.
Yeah.
Or a share, but mostly search or an aggregator like Newsbreak or an app that grabs it and sends it. People never visited your website. Then the idea is once they're there, you're hoping they click around. So AI is changing the entire model of what we thought was supposed to be, hey, we need lots of page views and clicks. So, I mean, it's challenging to stay up with.
I think that we just have to be careful. We have to just be really open to evolution in the media industry. We have to be careful about being purists and sticking to those core fundamental values of like, here are our ethics. Here are the things that fundamentally has not changed in journalism over the centuries. But the same way I'm sure there were newspapers that said, we're never gonna have a Twitter account. We just have to be adaptable to what the public wants, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to serve the public. And if we are hell-bent on we are not going to do XYZ thing, then you are missing out on a huge audience and a huge group of people that you're claiming to serve.
We've talked a lot about, sort of started off with what are the challenges, and we've spent a lot of time talking about the challenges and the ways you're continuing to try to do what you do with less. So on a higher note, what do you love about local news? Why do you do local news? We've talked for quite a bit of time about all the challenges. So what is it that drives you to stay in it and to continue to do it and purport the value of it?
You're the most local.
I don't know, maybe it was because I just started so young and never grew up. I think as an organization, we enjoy telling everybody the stories, the local stories, what's going on. My father always told me that our goal was to get people off the couch. And then we were supposed to get you motivated and want to go do something about it. And the second thing was when I first started in the business, I had to make a sales call. And it was my first one. And I was very nervous, and I went to see Tom Zahars at the candy store in Vermillion, Ohio. And he comes out, and he looks at me, and I'm he says, I don't need the photojournal for my business. Oh, this is not going to go well. But then he said, but you make a community a better place. You tell us about our neighbors. You keep the politicians honest, and you let me know what's going on. And I will buy a quarter-page ad from you for the rest of as long as I'm in business. And he did. But it really stuck with me when he did that. And it's kind of guided us for the last 50 years. Is we try to make the communities a better place. And that's why we do what we do.
I don't want to step on that great anecdote, so I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, I'll just echo that and say kind of what I said at the beginning, is that local government is the most tactile thing that people have access to. It is the way, they often think it's not as important as what's happening federally because there's a lot of noise going on federally, but really a lot of things that I think people don't realize happen locally. And so being on the ground, being in the community is really important to me. I think about, I did several internships in college, kind of trying to figure out my path and what I was going to do. And in J school, there's a lot of emphasis on go to a national publication, kind of have that glory or whatever. But I did a few internships at the Columbus Dispatch, and I loved being local and really having those stories that I could share from people in the community. And then one semester, I did an internship at a DC publication, and I was essentially just babysitting Trump's Twitter account, which was not only stressful, but it was like, I'm gonna write the same boring story from my desk that every other reporter in DC is gonna write about. But I wrote this great feature for the Columbus Dispatch about this organization that's helping veterans with PTSD. And then they call me and say, ever since you did this story, we've gotten thousands of dollars of donations. And to me, that was much more impactful than having thousands and thousands of eyes on a Trump, clickbait, basically. So that's really kind of what solidified for me the desire when I graduated to go back and really be in local news.
All right. Gretchen, we have some questions here from the audience that we wanted to give to you. We've some questions I think the panel got to. I know there were a lot of questions about AI, but I think you guys have already explored that. So if you could just, I don't know if we'll get through all of them. We have until a little after 1 o'clock. So I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, fantastic. This is actually an interesting one. Have you ever been duped when writing a story, by a source, for example? And if so, how do you handle that, or how did you handle that?
I'm not a journalist.
Yeah, I'll
It's
start.
on you.
Yeah. No, I think there have been a couple of stories over a long career where I regret it, and it wasn't ever a story of like I said something that somebody got me to say. It was more of like I didn't vet the individual enough. I felt that maybe his credibility wasn't what it should be and didn't deserve the story. I think there's probably been 2 cases. One I think even somewhat vaguely think from out here, but there's sometimes, I think it's more of a regret rather than an outright like dupe. I mean, it wasn't a fake story. I just felt like, my spidey senses didn't kick in enough. I do follow and everybody hates hearing this that works with me, but I believe in the policy. I do listen to a lot of people, and sometimes people are not, for lack of a better word, they might be obsessive over some topic or whatever, but I hear them out because as a journalist, I look at it like the Willy Wonka chocolate bar. You don't know which one has the golden ticket to unwrap it. So sometimes that takes me down roads that I probably wasted time on.
Another question, which is interesting, and we didn't necessarily touch on this, in terms of young audiences, there's a lot of research and talk about how, young audiences don't vote and young audiences don't follow the news. What is the news media's responsibility to try to engage a younger audience, or are you actively doing things to try to do so?
I have to leave that to them, too. We don't get the young audience.
I think it's incredibly important, and I think that's something, I work for an NPR station. It's something we still definitely struggle with. But when I was working at the Akron Beacon Journal, I will just give this example. I was covering the protests that came after Jaylen Walker was shot and killed by police. And I was up doing a lot of reporting to TikTok, actually, and it amassed hundreds of thousands of likes and views, and people were coming to my TikTok page. This was years ago, but to get that kind of first on the ground reporting, and it got to a point where it was like I was getting more likes on this TikTok page than we had subscribers. You know what I mean? And that to me was really eye-opening. Of people might discount TikTok because it's a young person's app and there is a lot of misinformation and things that can happen. But to me, it was a really good example of how firsthand reporting and reporting where people are at, it is really important, and people crave it and people care. So I think a lot of people say young people don't care, but I think it's just a matter of where they're existing online and what they're doing. And they're going to go to their Instagram feed before they're checking the New York Times website. So it is something that is really important, and it's something that I engage a lot of my friends about their media diet and things like that. But we just, like I said, we just have to adjust. And I think hiring and trusting young people is really important in the industry, because we know what we're doing. We know what's going to engage people on social media.
I mean, again, I think this particular question could be another whole long discussion. I think it shocks people when probably one of the forerunners, I think it was Wall Street Journal, that hired like a reporter to do Snapchat. I don't know if it was Peter Hambley, some well-known guy from CNN. Like, they were seeing it. Now, the difference is we may grow audience, but that isn't necessarily the audience that's going to be like financially supportive of it, right? And young people can sniff out a fake a mile away, so a lot of wasted time in trying to like convert a regular story to something for TikTok. And like, if it doesn't feel right, what felt right about what Abbey was doing and covering was, organic real-time reporting out of a demonstration, which, for those that don't know, most demonstrations, organizing these days is all happening on social media. So there is this massive audience that's built into following. Again, it is, it may not have produced financial revenue, but it was a connection point. Things are changing. We're all trying. You got a lot of audiences to serve. I mean, yes, we're building content that is more engaged for the audience that is subscribers to newsletters, that are supporters, that are, following the news. But it is a constant discussion and experimentation in most newsrooms, because it is a way you hope that you plant a seed or a breadcrumb and it leads someone back to you.
And I'll say from a education standpoint, one of the things that is really interesting about our students when they come into the journalism school is how few of them actually consume news. So they want to be journalists, but they do not watch or read or listen to the news. And I find that quite hilarious. But we, so as a result, we do a lot of just trying to get them to engage with the content that we're hoping that they will create, whether that be on social media or, again, on websites. And it's just interesting. They know that news is there, and obviously, we have people who want to make it and do the news, but they don't consume it, and they have a long list of reasons why they don't. So it is a challenge, even for the students who want to be journalists. It's a challenge in general to get them to engage with news content.
What we found, though, for us at our market, it has always been when kids finally decided to settle down and move to a community, that's when they would turn to publications like ours. That's when they started getting interested, because they had kids in the schools, they were paying taxes in the community. Problem now is that the younger generation is settling down later. They're having kids later. They're commuting too far, too long to go to work. They don't have time. And then when they do get home, they got to taxi their kids to God knows all these different things, and they're time crunched. And so it's always been a difficult thing trying to reach them. So
I think you need to offer a local news podcast that they can listen to while you're driving.
Clearly.
That's my meeting after today, okay.
This question kind of
That's
keeps.
next.
This question kind of keeps with the idea of the youth and sort of educating folks. The loss of local journalism leaves a gap, not just in reporting, but also in civic education. What strategies through schools, community partnerships, or alternative media could help ensure that citizens, especially young voters, can gain an understanding of local government roles and responsibilities and remain engaged in that democratic process? Is there anything that local media can do to contribute to that?
I mean, we at Ideastream, I work for the WKSU side, but we also have a PBS channel. We have News Depth, which is in schools. And I think that having like a local station and really a locally produced show is something that's really valuable in exposing kids to that early on. I don't work in the schools or anything, but I think media literacy, exposing children to that as early as possible is a really great thing. And that's something we as journalists can try to do in our everyday lives with adults. I try to do it all the time. If someone will say, "Did you see this?" And I ask, "Did you look that up and fact check it?" They just heard someone on TikTok say it or whatever. But that's a lot easier to do when you start it younger and letting people identify, what smells fishy about this, what's fishy about this as a kid. So it's something that we can try to do with adults. But I come from a family of educators, and I know that that's something ever since I became a journalist, my mom has tried to teach her first graders is looking out for how to identify misinformation or how to, look for a reliable source.
This question kind of keeps with that. It asks, how can I verify a source online? We talked about AI and some of the AI-generated things. This says I've been getting on my phone through Google what I think are AI-generated stories that I can't find a source for or verify. So how could the average person, are there tells? How can they tell the difference? What is a good source?
We just recently got a grant that paid for someone from the University of Indiana or something that came in and gave us a kind of like an AI seminar. What's ironic is there are really good AI services that help you detect AI. One of the biggest tells is like the death of the semicolon. So the long dashes and long sentences, that is generally, you'll find that is AI. But I can't cite for them and because I don't have them in front of me, but there are a lot of really pretty good services that can help you figure out if something was AI or not. And sadly, there are, I don't even want to call them news services, organizations putting out news that are not identifying things that are AI. I think most legitimate news organizations have that open policy, ethics policy, code of conduct that is identifying it. But, really, I teach my kids all the time, most of what you see online's fake. It's like, start there and don't click on any links that say you owe parking tickets, like those two.
Exactly.
I brought some rules of the road on how to get through social media and junk news. They're over there. It's kind of a list that I've built over the years on what to watch for, what to look for, how to identify, rather than go through them all. They're there for you to take and use as your.
Well,
They don't do AI though. This is pre-AI. Sorry.
Well, and it is difficult to tell. My husband likes TikTok. I'm not much of a TikToker, but he will show me what look like legitimate clips from newscasts or news stories. And as a broadcast, my former broadcast reporter, I can look at that and see it immediately. I'm like, here are things that a news organization would never do. This would never be how a TV person, would do this or would say this but if you don't, but I was a journalist, so those things are incredibly obvious to me, and I'll sort of explain and point them out, and he kind of looks at me like I'm on fire. And so without that, I think when you come up through media, you sort of understand the how it's done, and those things are very easy to see. But if you don't, some of those things are very slick. It's very difficult to tell the difference, and without some firm rules, don't feel bad about being fooled is sort of the lesson of that. There, some of the stuff is very slick. This is kind of an interesting question. Kind of goes to the idea of citizen journalists and kind of anybody can put anything out there. They ask, should there be regulations enforced about what can be called a news organization? And if there's a significant, if there is significant bias or misinformation, should they be, shut down? Or, what are the dangers in even something like that?
I was going to say, well, who gets to decide that?
Yeah.
Because then that's a whole other can of worms that you're opening, because that is a limitation of the First Amendment. So a threat to any speech is a threat to all speech. We know this. So that would be my concern.
No,
with
I
that.
mean, if we put Newsmax and the New York Times on a table and said, one of them's got to go because one's not real, you're going to get different answers.
Right.
And it's just, so, yeah, we're going to, again, back to the point, you got to educate the public that assume a lot is not real.
Absolutely. This is an interesting question because we had a little bit of a discussion about things like the Big Beautiful Bill. The question asks, if you repeat sort of those kind of PR statements like one big beautiful bill, are you just amplifying? Is that more of a megaphone for, and becoming a mouthpiece for that, particular political party or person? Or is using something like one big beautiful bill a way to attack and make sure people know what you're talking about because that's what they've heard?
I love the question, and maybe we can start with Obamacare. That was originally a derisive view that, though, became very important to the debate because we knew what it stood for. The one big beautiful bill, and I forget what the actual title is. It's one, I'm missing a B in there or something. That is what it represents. That was this Trump-driven, very viewed partisan bill, so it makes sense. I'm not gonna. I try to avoid the jargon that's in things that are. It's like a police-involved shooting. Okay, did a police officer shoot someone or not? Right, like that. That is different in my mind than the Obamacare one big beautiful bill. There are ways that I think if it's reflective of the actual context, I'm not against it. I am against so much jargon, and jargon is really coming through in so much, whether it's universities, hospitals do it, police departments do it. I think that's where we're getting challenged.
Another question, how difficult is it, especially in today's climate, how difficult is it to be nonpartisan or unbiased? Are you able to, how do you balance your own thoughts and beliefs about what you're covering and still trying to say, stay nonpartisan or unbiased?
I mean, I personally think it's a mistake to act like any journalist is unbiased or nonpartisan, because that's just not true. We're not robots. We're people that have thoughts and opinions, and we're experiencing things. We're talking to a lot of people. I think it's just recognizing those biases and kind of checking them within yourself, and being transparent with yourself about that, because it's just not, we're human people.
That's why we have editors and people read through it. In our case, a majority of the claims of bias and prejudice come from our letters, our columnists, and our cartoonists. And we have to explain to the readers that that's their opinion, it's not mine. And we still, I think, live in America where we have the right to express our opinions. And if I get more letters that lean to the left, that's what your neighbors are saying. It's not what, I'm just a venue for them to express their opinions. And that's where most of our claims of bias come from. It's the opinions and the letters, not so much on the news side of it.
Well, I want to, congratulate both of you on great points on that. And I think jumping off of that, strong editorial opinion voices. So New York Times, Wall Street Journal, very strong opinion. That is what's often used against them, right? To say one is this or one is that. I'm relieved to be working for a publication that does not do editorials, because I think so much of that is then thrown on to the reporting staff, which has bias. But as an editor, what I see, it's probably an insensitivity to a word that is actually loaded that we could find more neutral, right? That's where you see it seep in. I don't have a problem with empathy. I think that's very important in types of stories. That is often interpreted as bias. Also, reverse perspectives is seen as bias when it's not. If, we all saw there was a lot of coverage on transgendered issues around athletes. If someone covered the story from the perspective of the transgendered athlete, that was seen as bias, when in fact we're really just like, hey, well, here's what it's seen from the swimmer's point of view. You don't have to agree with it, but that gets tagged. So that's difficult. And editorials and endorsements, it's a whole different world. You don't need any newspaper to tell you who to vote for president. There is enough information out there. Senator, mayor, all that. Where you do need the newspaper is to tell you about the judges. Because nobody is translating, especially in places like Cuyahoga County, where everyone has the same name and in some way is often related or whatever, which is why Signal launched a project when we started, and we're going to do it again this year, is a judge's guide. We focused very much on Cleveland Municipal in some of the juvenile court. We made a printed card, distributed them at bus stops and places where we knew people needed to see it, because that's what we felt information. And they weren't endorsements, but it was that version of it, right? Like trying to translate for people. So I'm relieved we don't have editorial, which is kind of a long way of saying I agree with these two.
Well, I think I'm watching
Yeah.
our time. I think we are out of time. These were really great questions and really great answers. So I appreciate your willingness to share your perspective for the time that we've been up here. I think it's been a really great discussion.
And thank you to our
Thank you.
panelists.
Good job. It was a lot of fun doing it.
We have a little token of appreciation for all of you, so thank you so much for donating your time and spending some time with us here.
you.
Also, a few other thank yous. Trustee Andy Bushman is here from Munson Township. Thank you so much for the facility. This is a great place to have a meeting.
Enjoyed it.
And we could never put these events on without all our wonderful volunteers from the League of Women Voters. There are countless of them here, and they've been here since 10 this morning. So thank you to all of them.